Imagine if one company controlled almost an entire sport. They decide who fights, they decide how much fighters get paid, they even decide who becomes champion. And if you want to be considered the best fighter in the world, you basically have to work for them. Today we're breaking down why many people believe the UFC operates less like a sports league and more like a cartel. What a cartel actually is. Before we talk about the UFC, we need to understand something. A cartel isn't just a criminal organization. In economics, a cartel is when a small group controls a market so strongly that competition barely exists. They can control prices, control supply, and control who gets access to the market. Now think about MMA. There are other promotions like the PFL, One Championship, and Bellator. But when fans talk about the best fighters in the world, they almost always mean UFC fighters, and that's where the power begins. Buying the competition. The UFC didn't become the biggest MMA organization overnight. They systematically absorbed or eliminated competitors. Over the years, they purchased major promotions like Pride FC, Strikeforce, and WEC. When these promotions disappeared, their fighters, titles, and fan bases all moved into the UFC, which meant one thing. The best fighters in the world were now under one company. And once that happens, every new fighter wants to go there too. This is called a network effect, where the biggest platform keeps getting bigger because everyone wants to compete there. Why fighters don't have many options. Now imagine you're a top MMA fighter. You want the biggest fights, the most recognition, the world title. But here's the catch. For most fans, the only world champion that matters is the UFC champion. So even if another promotion pays more, fighters still feel pressure to sign with the UFC because that's where the spotlight is. Critics argue this gives the company massive leverage over fighter pay and contracts. And that is why fighters are so underpaid compared to boxing, because there is no one big league in boxing. At least not yet there isn't. The real secret to the UFC's dominance might be simpler than people think. They built the strongest brand, the biggest events, like the White House event, and the Sphere, and the best roster. When fans think of MMA, they think of the UFC. And when fighters want to prove they're the best, they go to the UFC, which creates a cycle that keeps the company on top. The contract system. One of the biggest criticisms is the way UFC contracts work. Many fighters sign exclusive deals, meaning they can't compete anywhere else. These contracts can also extend automatically if a fighter becomes champion, they're injured, or the UFC adds fights to the contract. So even though fighters are technically independent contractors, they're often tied to the promotion for years. Critics say this limits fighter freedom and keeps wages low compared to other sports. Fighter pay. Another reason people make the cartel comparison is fighter pay. In most major sports leagues like the NFL or NBA, athletes receive roughly 50% of league revenue. But in MMA, fighters reportedly receive a much smaller percentage of the UFC's total revenue. This became such a big issue that former fighters even filed antitrust lawsuits against the UFC, claiming the company suppressed wages by dominating the market. So is the UFC basically a cartel? That depends on who you ask. Some see a company that dominates its industry and controls fighter careers. Others see the organization that saved MMA and made it global. But one thing is undeniable. The UFC isn't just another promotion anymore. It is the sport.